Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the history of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. 1993 was kind of a big year for Sega Genesis hardware. Both Japan and North America got the sleeker, cost-reduced Mega Drive 2 and the flip-top Mega CD 2. Sega introduced the official 6-button controller so that Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter were actually playable on the system. Both Electronic Arts and Sega launched their own 4-player adapters. In Japan, Sega released the Mega Mouse, while Victor released the updated Wonder Mega M2 model, a Mega Drive Mega CD hybrid console that would serve as the basis for the JVC XI in North America. Heck, even the fabled Genesis VR helmet was demonstrated in 1993, with a scheduled launch date of December that same year. But the most interesting bit of kit that year, in my opinion, was the gargantuan Pioneer LaserActive, which was compatible with everything under the sun and came with the promise of marrying the Sega Genesis and TurboGrafx-16 with Laserdiscs.
These kids at the Celebrity Sports Center here in Denver are playing the newest rage in arcade games, Dragon's Lair.
Games on Laserdisc were nothing new in 1993. Even those of us not old enough to remember playing Cinematronic's Dragon's Lair in the arcades likely know that it was a big deal in the early 80s. And by the time 1993 rolled around, North American Sega fans had been introduced to a whole new world of Laserdisc titles thanks to the ports of arcade games like Road Avenger and Cobra Command on the Sega CD. But Sega's relationship with Laserdisc games runs much deeper than that. While Dragon's Lair definitely was a massive hit that was credited with lifting arcades out of a slump, at least before it was basically declared a dead medium a year later, it was preceded by another Laserdisc title, Sega's Astron Belt, which Sega debuted at the Amusement Operators Trade Show in 1982. Cashbox Magazine's coverage of the show focused on Sega's new hardware, calling it by far the most compelling new attraction at the expo. In fact, Dragon's Lair creator Rick Dyer saw Astron Belt at that same expo and realized then that the technology he was looking at was the answer he'd been searching for.
They showed it, and as a matter of fact, I think that was a huge mistake for them, because we were working on the Dragon's Lair project. And at that point, we realized that we were in a horse race, and we had to be first. And we were. When they showed that, it definitely lit a fire under us.
Dyer had been working on a system he called the Fantasy Machine, which was meant to run what was basically a graphic adventure he designed called The Secrets of the Lost Woods. His exposure to Sega's Laserdisc game at the show was the catalyst for the transition to what would become Dragon's Lair. And while Sega did get Astron Belt to market before Dragon's Lair in Japan, it would come out months behind the animated hit in US arcades. But Astron Belt actually wasn't the first Laserdisc-based arcade game, as is often claimed. That achievement belongs to Quarter Horse, a horse race betting simulator released by Electrosport in 1981. Here, players would place bets on an upcoming horse race, at which point, I assume, the system would randomly select and play race footage from the disc to determine which player was the winner.
Here comes a Dynamite on the outside, Hawkeye and a Sweet Cess. They're all in line.
Astron Belt, however, was the first instance of Laserdisc technology being used to display analog video overlaid with sprite-based objects and user interface in order to play a game in real time. It was a basic, into-the-screen 3D rail shooter. Well, basic now, but not all that common back then. Various clips of different footage would play based on how the player was performing. Astron Belt featured footage from sources like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and other films like Battle Beyond the Stars and Message from Space. Nowadays, we tend to look at this and assume that Sega was playing fast and loose with the legalities of using copyrighted material, but it's important to remember at this time Paramount Pictures and Sega were both owned by Gulf and Western, so it's entirely possible that all of the footage in Astron Belt was being used legally. The previously mentioned article from Cashbox Magazine claims as much. Sega's Laserdisc arcade hardware was a combination of a Sega JAMA board and Laserdisc player. According to Sega Retro, it was home to 5 Sega games total. Astron Belt, Galaxy Ranger, and Albigos in 1983, and 1984's GP World. Sega dusted off the hardware again in 1991 for their holographic game Time Traveler. Interestingly enough, Time Traveler was designed by Rick Dyer. Data East made use of the Sega Laserdisc arcade hardware in '83 as well for their game Cobra Command, which would see new life in 1992 when it was ported to the Mega CD by Wolf Team. In spite of looking like an oversized CD-ROM, Laserdisc actually predates the compact disc by a decade or so. And although the compact disc is an evolution of the original optical discs, Laserdiscs are an analog storage medium, not digital. While both disc types are encoded by burning pits across their respective surfaces, Laserdisc encoding features pits of different lengths, which are then reflected by the laser stylus and interpreted via frequency modulation. Pits on compact discs, and subsequently DVDs, Blu-ray, etc., are uniform and are interpreted through the laser as binary ones and zeros, on and off. The history of the Laserdisc format is a bit fuzzy, as different sources use different dates. But here's a high-level overview. The optical disc was first created by David Paul Gregg in 1958, which he patented in 1962. These patents were acquired by the Music Corporation of America, otherwise known as MCA, in 1968. MCA had thousands of films sitting in its vault collecting dust, finding little use after their initial theatrical runs. It was looking for a way to bring those films back to the masses and earn some more revenue. David Paul Gregg's video disc was a potential answer to that problem. MCA Laboratories began working on a home video system in 1969. Dubbed DiscoVision, no kidding, MCA first showed a prototype player and discs to the press in December of 1972. It was at that point that they were approached by Dutch electronics company Philips, which had been developing a similar disc-based home video system called the RCA Selectavision. Before MCA had purchased controlling interest in Gauss electrophysics in 1968, and thus ownership of the video disc patents, Gauss had shown their idea to Philips. Rather than turning the exciting new idea of home video into a battleground for a format war, MCA and Philips agreed to a period of cooperation, where they would share information and come up with a standardized format. MCA would press the discs, Philips would build the disc players and sell them through their Magnavox brand. But it wasn't an exclusive deal, and so MCA sought out other electronics manufacturers to produce DiscoVision players for industrial applications. The Japanese firm Pioneer got on board. This led to the development of the PR7820 player, which is the very device found in many of the Dragon's Lair arcade cabinets released in 1983.
The world on a silver platter. Magnavox, the new video disc player from Magnavox.
MCA and Magnavox introduced DiscoVision discs and the Magnavox player to the world in December of 1978 with a test run in Atlanta. Approximately 25 systems were available for an MSRP of $749. I know inflation isn't always the best way to put prices in perspective, but that's the equivalent of about $3,000 US in 2020. That might seem high, but remember that a VHS VCR around this time was almost $1,300. Plus, at this point, there was a format war going on between VHS and Betamax, so DiscoVision seemed like a good bet, even if it was a little pricey.
Magnavox.
The first run of Magnavox players sold out immediately, but were plagued with playback issues. Philips blamed the shoddy quality of MCA's DiscoVision discs. MCA blamed Philips and said they should update their players for better compatibility. All the while, the industrial-grade Pioneer PR7820 was working relatively problem-free in Japan. Pioneer introduced the VP1000 to the retail market in 1980, which was basically a consumer version of the PR7820, and began to relegate the Magnavox to also-ran status. Pioneer had also convinced MCA that it made sense to let them press discs at their own factory in Japan, giving the Japanese electronics firm total control over the quality of both the players and the discs. This would prove to be MCA DiscoVision's undoing. Leading up to the launch of DiscoVision, MCA was feeling the strain of being the sole creator and replicator of video discs. And disc quality was terrible. DiscoVision eventually partnered with IBM in order to infuse the group with cash, but this proved problematic as IBM didn't direct said cash towards the existing production facility and went more toward corporate restructuring and building new facilities. While the MCA DiscoVision Associates division floundered, the Pioneer facility in Japan was producing discs of vastly superior quality. Eventually, IBM tightened the purse strings and shuttered DiscoVision Associates in 1981. Pioneer swooped in to buy out DiscoVision's interests in their previous partnership and became the sole owner of the Laserdisc format. So all was well. Pioneer owned a format that was superior to videocassette in almost every way. Although the discs were as big as a 12-inch vinyl LP and a bit fragile compared to VHS and Betamax cassettes, the quality of the image put VHS to shame, nearly double the horizontal resolution. And it was cheaper to buy films on Laserdisc than videocassette. In the early 80s, not only were pre-recorded videotapes extremely expensive, they weren't available for purchase by the general public. Unfortunately, in the late 70s and early 80s, watching feature-length films at home wasn't really something the public was asking for. At least not something the average viewer was ready to pay $750 to do. As I've seen written in multiple articles during research for this episode, Laserdisc was a solution looking for a problem. Videocassette, on the other hand, solved a very real problem most television viewers had. You could record programs that you might otherwise miss.
We're missing the big football game. Relax! My VHS home video recorder is taping it right now.
In a pre-internet, pre-DVR world, all television was appointment television, and VCRs allowed consumers to time shift, to see their favorite programs at their relative leisure. The ability to watch feature-length films at home, which was mostly limited to renting tapes until the early 90s, was an added perk with a VCR, not the sole purpose of the device. Ultimately, Laserdisc only ended up with something like 4% market penetration in the US by the time DVD came along and changed the game. The format was slightly more successful in Japan, but still didn't own the market. That didn't stop Laserdisc from being supported up until the early 2000s, though, and there were a lot of industrial uses for the format as well. It was used for training videos, video catalogs, retail information kiosks, in schools, and yes, in video
games.
Across
the country. Now we're entering the age of electronics, and Sears is leading the way. With this new video disc catalog, we can provide you with more and better product information than we ever could on the printed page.
The gameplay potential of pre-recorded Laserdisc and videotape was identified during the first annual Gametronics conference in 1977 by none other than keynote speaker and father of video games, Ralph Baer. While discussing the future of video games, Baer suggested user-controlled players could be superimposed over footage of, say, a hockey game that was transmitted via cable, or perhaps users playing a pre-recorded game show.
This leads me to the last TV game-related topic, and that is the future relationship between TV games and videotape or disc playback equipment. We can visualize road racing games in which our TV set becomes a convincing view through the windshield. While the pictorial imagery comes from the tape, we will do electronic processing of this video information to suit it to your steering wheel commands. At any rate, there is little doubt that once videotape or disc home entertainment systems have become a widely accepted consumer product, a game playing capability will be one of the things you will find in every machine. Ralph Baer, Sanders Associates.
As early as 1980, there were studios taking advantage of the interactivity Laserdisc players provided. The ability to jump to different frames or chapters, to advance frame by frame, and to switch between multiple audio tracks were all used to create new experiences.
What a marvelous learning tool. And by using the 2 channels of sound with this NFL How to Watch Pro Football disc, I can watch a goal line stand and listen to the philosophies of two different coaches.
Optical Programming Associates released How to Watch Pro Football, which taught viewers the intricacies of football plays and formations, and presented them with an interactive quiz to see what they learned.
When you attack the middle, you're just hitting in there in the most direct manner you possibly can.
Optical Programming Associates really went for it in 1981 with the first National Kid Disc. This collection of magic tricks, jokes, dance instruction, and more took full advantage of the medium, alternately asking viewers to advance frame by frame or to read various panels, using multi-speed playback to slow down various segments or learn magic tricks, and swapping between multiple audio tracks during dance videos to hear more detailed instructions on each step. Meanwhile, Robert E. Robbins of Vidmax Corporation thought the medium held even more potential. He recruited New York playwright Hy Conrad for his thoughts on the best way to exploit the various features of Laserdisc. Conrad was intrigued by the medium's ability to play alternate audio tracks over the same video footage. This ultimately grew into the Mystery Disc series, Murder Anyone and Many Roads to Murder.
Tired of zapping the same old electronic aliens? Well, good news. Shooting is already underway on the second in a series of video games using live actors.
These were party games not unlike Clue, where you would watch segments of video, review clues, and then players would try to figure out the identity of the murderer and their motive. Thanks to the multi-audio feature, each disc was able to house 16 different stories. The Mystery Disc series starred Paul Breakfast Club Gleason, and Murder Anyone also happened to be the screen debut of Leah Thompson.
No, Uncle Derek, you shouldn't.
Also, tomorrow morning I'm changing my will.
While the phenomenon of more action-packed full-motion video games had more or less come and gone from arcades by the mid-'80s, some were still chasing the concept for the home market.
Visit worlds which were only dreams before Halcyon, like nothing you have experienced ever.
The creator of Dragon's Lair, Rick Dyer, bet the farm on his RDI Halcyon system. Named HAL for short, and yes, that is a reference to the film 2001, the Halcyon was going to be a voice-activated home video game console based on similar Laserdisc technology to that found in the Dragon's Lair and Space Ace games.
Talking about isn't the future, it's here, it's today.
More impressively, the Halcyon would interface with other systems in your home and would be smart enough to learn your name and converse with you.
It's like a living entity more than it is a machine. It also hasn't what we call artificial intelligence.
So really, it was planned to be a set-top box in a time when that phrase didn't even exist. Smart homes are still rare even now, almost 40 years later. This was space-age technology back in 1985, and something so advanced would have come at an advanced price.
Quality control to ensure satisfaction for the $2,500 price tag.
Or around $6,000 in 2020. Unfortunately, the Halcyon dream was way ahead of its time. To make things worse, the industry had just gone through the big crash, shrinking the potential market that much more. The RDI Halcyon died before it ever came to market. Two games were known to be in development for the Halcyon. One was a football game codenamed Armchair Quarterback that appears to have been licensed by the NFL and could be played via voice recognition.
Bomb.
Oh boy.
Bob targeting. Backpedaling to throw. Sets, runs, moves to his right, gets a rush, gets hit, throws deep. No good, nobody there.
The other was Thayer's Quest, which was eventually completed and released to arcades, and then resurrected as a Philips CDI game, DVD game, and released to personal computers as Kingdom: The Far Reaches. Much like it had done with Laserdisc technology itself, while Rick Dyer was struggling to get a Laserdisc-based console to market in the US, Pioneer was succeeding at something similar back in Japan. In 1985, it released the Palcom PX7, an MSX1 computer capable of interfacing with a Laserdisc player, allowing video production such as superimposing sprites over analog video, as well as playing Laserdisc games. The system itself retailed for 89,800 yen, the equivalent of about $1,000 today. But I believe that price didn't include the actual Laserdisc player. About a dozen games were produced for the system, including arcade ports such as Konami's Badlands and Sega's Astron Belt. Pioneer eventually released a LaserVision interface so that all MSX computers could talk to Laserdisc players. The prohibitive price not only of the Laserdisc format, but consoles built to take advantage of it in the early 80s, made the entire idea pretty much a non-starter for the general home market, and the games industry would instead focus mostly on cartridge-based entertainment for the rest of the decade.
Will you be the one to witness the birth of the incredible Nintendo Entertainment System? The one to play with Rob, the extraordinary video robot, batteries not included.
But full-motion video gaming didn't die. It just moved into a different space for the balance of the 1980s. While Laserdisc floundered as a home video medium, VCRs flourished, with market penetration steadily growing from about 15% in the early 80s up to nearly 70% by the end of the decade.
Hold it there, Pilgrim. Barker Brothers has more news than... Well, hell, this is as big as the sky.
The most mainstream form of this was the VCR board game. They were basically an extension of what Optical Programming Associates and VidMax were doing with Laserdiscs back in the early 80s. These took on a lot of different shapes, from simple trivia games to celebrity charades. My family actually owned Rich Little's charades when I was a kid, though I don't ever remember us seriously playing it. The VCR version of the classic Clue board game is considered to be the first of the VCR board game genre. Released in 1985, the game requires players to watch multiple scenes while keeping notes on their own pads, paying attention to small details in order to solve the crime. It bears more than a passing resemblance to the VidMax Mystery Disc series, which isn't a surprise. Back in 1983, newspaper columnist Joe Saltzman described the Mystery Disc series as a sophisticated video version of the board game Clue. Mystery Disc designer and author Hy Conrad was brought in as a writer on both Clue VCR games as well, further linking the two series. There were dozens of VCR board games released, and the video portions of these games were used in surprisingly varied ways. The VCR version of Candyland was a simple color matching game where players would watch the screen for swatches of color to appear and then remove like-colored tiles from the included board. The Nightmare series of VCR games felt more like standard board games, with the video component acting as a timer, as well as introducing periodic rule changes or player-specific challenges anytime the gatekeeper came roaring onto the screen.
Whose turn is it next?
The game was kept fresh by the release of subsequent videotapes, which all used the same game board.
For more excitement, let's go to the races.
There were sports VCR games as well. Some played out sort of like the aforementioned Quarter Horse, where you would set your play or place your bet and then run the tape to see how things turned out.
Let's play football. You're on!
Others, like the VCR Quarterback, only required the tape to be played when certain cards were pulled. Many VCR games suffered for the same reasons that videotape was an inferior medium to Laserdisc. In so many of these games, you'd spend loads of time fast-forwarding or rewinding the tapes to specific scenes. Situations where a Laserdisc could almost instantly jump to a particular scene instead. VCR games were still a cool idea. The barrier to entry was low, since so many people had everything they needed to play them right in their living rooms. No expensive new tech, no fiddling with TV hookups or special controllers. And sure, they felt gimmicky, but firing up VCR Clue was way cooler than yet another unfinished game of Monopoly on Family Game Night.
Commercial Crazy's VCR game. New from Mattel.
But the dream of more video gaming full-motion video games at home didn't die with the Halcyon. Multiple manufacturers tried their hand at creating VCR-based game consoles, with varying degrees of success. And just like VCR board games, the fact that so many households had VCRs attached to the family TV reduced cost and lowered the barrier to entry. A lot of these consoles took the form of light guns. not unlike the tech used on the Master System, NES, and Genesis. A multi-sensor setup would scan for targets on the screen and check against input to see if the user had hit said target or taken damage by a shot fired by the game. Usually these targets were denoted by giant flashing areas on the screen. 1987 was a big year for this technology. Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future aired on television in North America. This live-action science fiction series was one of, if not the earliest, example of interactive broadcast television.
Captain Power has come to TV, and you can be part of it. What are you doing? Aim the PowerJet XT7, fire invisible beams at the television targets, and score!
If a viewer had one of the Captain Power toys sold by Mattel, at certain points in each episode, they could actually play a simple shooter. Sensors housed in the toys themselves read hits and misses based on flashing targets on screen, as well as registered hits to the player in a similar fashion. This really felt like living in the future back in 1987.
Intelligence has identified a substantial buildup of hostile forces right here in our own backyard. And I'm giving you the green light to clean them out. Gentlemen, you're the best. Get up there and prove it.
That same year, Worlds of Wonder released its Action Max system, which was a light gun and gray box which didn't really need to attach to the television or VCR. Players would manually reset the score on the box whenever they started a new tape, and the sensors would simply register hits or misses for, really, any game tape that featured proper flashing hit zones. In particular, a hit zone on the bottom right of the screen where users would attach a sensor directly to the glass via suction cup. The Takara Video Challenger was a similar system, though more self-contained. This was literally a gun that held all of the hardware and performed the same as the Action Max. In fact, it most likely could use the same game tapes as the Worlds of Wonder system. Interestingly enough, the Video Challenger received VCR game ports of some classic Japanese arcade games, like Thunderstorm, which we know as Cobra Command, Road Blaster, and even Sega's Afterburner 2. Plus, it got a game based on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
You are the driver with Tyco's new video driver.
Speaking of Sega, it got in on the VCR console train in 1988 with Video Driver. This simplistic driving controller featured a steering wheel and a horizontal track where the player's car would move back and forth based on steering input. The track and car were really just a housing for the sensor. Like the Action Max and Video Challenger, the Video Driver didn't need to be connected directly to the TV or VCR to work. Simply mount the track in front of the television so that the sensor could read the flashing bars at the bottom of the screen, and then play any of the half-dozen game tapes available for the system. As long as you steered clear of the sensors during play, your score didn't drop. 1989's ViewMaster Interactive Vision was a bit more ambitious. Unlike previous VCR game consoles, the Interactive Vision acted like a pass-through for the VCR to the television. The game tapes featured a data track on them that would allow the system to superimpose an interactive layer of digital graphics on the analog video, very similar to what had been seen in early Laserdisc arcade games like Astron Belt and the Pioneer Palcom PX7. This allowed for a much deeper level of interaction with each game tape than seen in previous VCR consoles. Building a wall around Big Bird or playing a rudimentary version of Frogger starring Mickey and Minnie Mouse, all of the tapes for the Interactive Vision were licensed by Sesame Street, The Muppets, or Disney.
Somewhere in your neighborhood, the hamster's rolling through.
During the mid-80s, a company named Axlon was playing around with their own videotape-based game console. Codenamed Nemo, for Never Ever Mention Outside, the system used VHS tapes that contained digital data, much like the ones for the Interactive Vision, as well as multiple tracks of video that could be switched on the fly during playback. The company had completed 3 prototypes for the Nemo: Scene of the Crime, Bottom of the Ninth, and an interactive music video featuring the song You Might Think by the Cars. Axlon, founded by Nolan Bushnell of Atari fame, partnered with Hasbro with the intention of bringing the newly dubbed Control Vision to market in 1989, at a projected price of $299. 2 games were created for the system before launch, Night Trap and Sewer Shark. Other notable names attached to the Nemo project were Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak and eventual Sega head of marketing Al Nilsson. By 1989, however, optical disc technology had started to infiltrate the video game industry in the form of CD-ROM drives for PCs, as well as the launch of the PC Engine CD-ROM system in Japan, repackaged and released for the TurboGrafx 16 in the US in 1989. The U.S. Optical Publishing Association estimated that CD-ROM drive usage in the United States grew from approximately 6,500 drives in 1986 to over 88,000 by 1988. U.S. analysts Infotech estimated the worldwide usage of CD-ROM drives had grown to 2.5 million by 1991 and forecast that number would more than double in 1992. This and the fact that the 16-bit consoles on the market, or coming to market, were much cheaper than $299 caused stakeholders to lose faith in the Control Vision, and it was shelved. Team member Tom Zito bought the rights to Night Trap and Sewer Shark and mothballed them. The multimedia revolution of the 90s was in full swing, and while the internet was still growing slowly, CD-ROM technology was the next best thing, making previously unimagined amounts of data extremely portable and affordable.
Welcome to the adventure of Compton's Interactive Encyclopedia, a journey into knowledge.
The information technology industry, for almost its entire life hamstrung by the high cost of relatively small amounts of memory for its products, saw the potential in such a high-density storage medium that was relatively cheap to produce, resilient, and easy to distribute. The term multimedia had been in use for decades before the 90s. Back in the 70s, the word literally meant the act of using multiple mediums to complete a task. Multimedia teaching techniques, for example, featured using images, film, overheads, and so forth to make learning more engaging. And when you think about it, the term's definition in the 90s hadn't changed all that much. It had just been expanded to include the streamlining of this sort of technique. In his book Multimedia, author Tony Feldman defined the term as the seamless integration of data, text, images of all kinds, and sound within a single digital interface environment. The going theory throughout the early 90s was that multimedia should be optical disc based and interactive. The trick, according to Feldman, was how to do so without creating a large barrier to entry for the average user. Why were video games and home entertainment so important to the burgeoning multimedia landscape? Simple. It was estimated that 98% of homes in the US contained at least one television, while around 50% contained 2 or more. There were hundreds of millions of televisions in use the world over at the end of the 80s. As Tony Feldman put it, much of the momentum behind consumer multimedia is fueled by the quest for even a small slice of a very large cake. Feldman argued that games and full-motion video movies were so important to consumer multimedia consoles because of their entry-level appeal. The smart money early on was focused heavily on educational software that really didn't gain a foothold in the market. Through more consumable products like games and movies, these Trojan horses would grow with their users and begin to branch out to more different types of software as that happened. Multimedia PCs were expensive, difficult to use for inexperienced users, and could generally only be used by one person at a time.
Don't touch anything, okay? Okay.
Plus, we didn't want little Johnny accidentally deleting Dad's hard drive.
You're not doing anything. Oh, no. Timmy, don't touch anything. Please don't do the touching.
Mom, what does erased disc mean?
But the general public wasn't going to plug a computer into the family television. The form factor needed to fit the surroundings, and the interface needed to be accessible by Mom, Dad, and the kids.
We decided to package it like a piece of fine audio gear to make it very user-friendly and usable in a living room environment. we really didn't want to build a computer. We wanted to build an entertainment and educational platform for the whole family. It's sort of the center of the educational hearth, if you would, or the center of the library of the future. And in a library you have movies and sounds and books of fiction, books of reference, and we wanted to bring all that together into the home.
All-in-one set-top boxes were the answer, a central hub for the entire family's entertainment needs. Hollywood and Silicon Valley needed to partner up.
If you want to make interactive entertainment into a mass market, something that is used in every household, then you have to make a big jump in the realism of the experience. Trip Hawkins, President, 3DO.
Between 1988 and 1995, there was a multimedia boom in the games industry, focused entirely on optical discs. While there were CD add-ons for the TurboGrafx-16, the Jaguar, and of course the Sega Genesis, these felt more like an extension of the existing consoles and their focus entirely on video games, with the odd dalliance into things like reference materials or edutainment. And certainly none of them were promising full-on feature-length movies, though full-motion video was definitely a thing, especially in Sega's case. The ultimate prize, however, was the set-top box. And starting with the Philips CDI in 1990, there was a bevy of players in the space. Commodore's CD-TV in 1991, the Tandy Video Information System in 1992, and 1993 saw the 3DO, Amiga CD32, and FM Towns Marty all hit the market. On January 6th, just the day before the 1993 Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Pioneer announced its intention to join the multimedia revolution with the LaserActive. But while everyone else was betting the farm on high-capacity digital storage provided by CD-ROM or proprietary formats derived from compact discs, Pioneer had a different message.
LaserActive will create a demand for more sophisticated interactive home entertainment. As an analog-digital hybrid system, it achieves the best full-motion interactive video possible. Because it is an extension of the Laserdisc format, LaserActive is a familiar technology that will address consumers' entertainment needs both today and tomorrow. Sho Yamada, President of Pioneer Electronics.
The logic behind the message was simple. While CDs and CDIs could store images, audio, video, and other data in a 540 megabyte area, the Laserdiscs used in the LaserActive could store the same amount of digital data in the track normally reserved for digital audio and still have the ability to store 60 minutes of analog video and FM sound. This all sounds a bit familiar.
And in fact, before we began talking here, we loaded the program which controls this game also from the video disc. It's on the Audio 2 channel in a format very similar to what other computers in the home would use, an audio cassette.
So you don't have to have a read-only memory cartridge on this or a cassette or a floppy disk. The data comes right off of the disk itself. Right?
That's right.
Using the player for education purposes, which was a huge part of the multimedia push in the mid-90s, Pioneer touted LaserActive's ability to store 108,000 natural still pictures and still have room for FM audio and 540 megabytes of data, as opposed to the CDI being able to store 7,000 images with no room left for audio or anything else. Plus, and this was a key element when considering the coming together of Hollywood and Silicon Valley, the video in LaserActive games did not need to be digitally compressed. It was, by its analog nature, a higher quality output than what you would see on a Sega CD, 3DO, or CDI. No postage stamp-sized videos with limited colors on the LaserActive. And unlike Pioneer with the LaserActive, 3DO and Philips machines couldn't even play feature-length films right out of the box. Both systems required the addition of an MPEG-1 video card that came out after launch and cost hundreds of dollars over and above the price of the original hardware. Pioneer's comparisons were pretty compelling on the surface. The CLD A100 LaserActive was a modular system with expandable feature sets based on which module, known as packs, you inserted into the expansion bay. The base unit was a pretty standard Laserdisc compact disc combo system, giving users the ability to play 8 and 12-inch Laserdiscs, as well as 3 and 5-inch CDs and CDVs. The CDV, or CD video, was a hybrid format that combined the digital music capabilities of a standard CD, but could also hold up to 5 minutes of analog video. The Sega Mega LD and NEC LD ROM packs were the exciting part. Plug the Sega Pack S10 into the LaserActive, and you've added the ability to play Genesis cartridges, Sega CD games, and CD plus G discs. The NEC Pack N10 unit unlocked the ability to play Turbo Chip games, Turbo CD games, and CD plus G discs. These partnerships guaranteed the Pioneer LaserActive a built-in library of over 400 cartridge and CD-ROM games and thousands of movies before a single system-specific game was ever pressed to disc. This was something that consoles like the CDI and 3DO couldn't claim.
This relationship has produced a technology which we believe is at the highest end of the electronics industry. We anticipated that the LaserActive player will create new demand for Sega video games by drawing new players into the interactive arena. Tom Kalinske, President and CEO of Sega of America.
The emergence of digital-based interactive systems with limited and non-compatible specifications had created a lot of confusion at both retail and consumer level. LaserActive, which is based on Laserdisc technology, offers consumers a familiar product with advanced performance capabilities, an existing software base, and a strong dealer support network. Mike Feidler, Senior Vice President, Pioneer.
There was one other pack announced at the Winter CES. Plugging in the Karaoke Pack added laser karaoke compatibility to the mix, a format that was particularly important to Pioneer in the Japanese market. Now you could play any laser karaoke disc, plug in 2 microphones, and go to town. Billboard writer Chris McGowan proclaimed the LaserActive a cure for what he called the techno-chaos infecting the electronics industry in 1993. As a multitude of audio, video, and interactive systems fight it out in the format wars, consumers try to find room for yet another black box, muddle through their newest 50-page instruction booklets, and line up their newest remote controls with 10 others on the shelf. And all the while, wires and cables spread insidiously like kudzu vines through the living room and den. Pioneer Electronics has divined an elegantly simple solution to alleviate these concerns: the LaserActive Multiplayer, a remarkable unit that combines unprecedented versatility and ease of use. All in all, the LaserActive would ultimately be able to play a whopping 10 different media formats: Laserdiscs, laser karaoke discs, CD video discs, CD video LD discs, audio CDs, CD plus G discs, Turbo Duo HuCard games, Turbo Duo CD games, Sega Genesis cartridges, and Sega CD games. And all using one power socket and one set of cables to your TV or amplifier. One thing the Pioneer wasn't forthcoming about during the Winter CES, however, was the suggested retail price. At the same show, 3DO and Panasonic were telling the world their interactive multimedia player would cost $700 at retail later that year. The CDI originally hit the market in 1991 at $800. How much would all the versatility of the LaserActive cost at the counter? In his Look to the East column in the May 1993 issue of Electronic Games, Mark Cameron predicted the LaserActive unit would cost around $700, and about $400 each for the expansion modules, which appears to be based on the prices when the hardware launched in Japan. Cameron also predicted a considerable price drop within a couple months of the US release. Finally, in October of 1993, the LaserActive hit shelves at select retailers in New York, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, Miami, and San Francisco. Pioneer cited an existing library of over 50,000 CDs, 7,500 movies, 2,000 hit laser karaoke songs, and over 400 Genesis and TurboGrafx 16 games on day one, assuming, of course, you owned all 3 optional modules. In the press release heralding the launch, Pioneer announced that it was in discussions with around 50 different game and video producers to provide software. Among them, Sega of America, The New Learning Project, Virgin Games, and Digital Pictures.
I think what's fascinating to people about interactive is their ability to control media that they had no control over before. It'll really change the way we think of entertainment, which has been traditionally passive.
On top of that, Pioneer was organizing something it called the Multimedia Creators Network, a group of computer graphics experts, musicians, film producers, directors, and academic researchers who had expressed interest in creating LaserActive software. It had previously created a similar group in Japan, which included influential recording artist and producer Haruomi Hosono, one of the very first people to release what we would call today a chiptune album featuring audio from a series of Namco arcade games. Some of the names attached to the American Multimedia Creators Network included former Beatles producer George Martin and prolific American musician Herbie Hancock. But the true impact of the LaserActive launch was the sticker shock. The base unit itself went for a whopping $970 at retail. The Sega and NEC packs were $600 a piece, with the karaoke pack running another $350. LaserActive software itself was listed at $120 per title. So in order to take advantage of all those different formats, the customer was forking over $2,520 on day one. Add a single LaserActive game to that bundle, and you're talking about the equivalent of almost $5,000 in today's dollars. There were 4 titles available at the US launch of the LaserActive: Quiz-Iconosaurus, The Great Pyramid, Pyramid Patrol, and I Will, The Story of London. Quiz-Iconosaurus was the pack-in title for the NEC pack. It's a multiplayer board game style quiz game centering around the environment and featuring a whole lot of animated dinosaurs. It was the only launch game exclusive to the NEC pack. Reports at the time stated that anyone who bought NEC hardware at system launch also received the same Super CD compilation disc found in the Turbo Duo box, featuring Bonk's Adventure, Bonk's Revenge, Gate of Thunder, and Bomberman, plus a Laserdisc copy of Disney's Fantasia, and, of course, a nice LaserActive branded TurboGrafx 16 control pad. The pack-in software for the Sega pack was Pyramid Patrol. Pyramid Patrol is an on-rail shooter featuring a free-roaming target reticle wandering over pre-rendered video of pyramid-themed levels. Much like with the NEC pack, Sega hardware apparently also came with the classic Sega CD software bundle, including Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volume 1 and the Sega Classics Arcade Collection featuring slightly upgraded versions of Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, Columns, and The Revenge of Shinobi. A copy of Disney's Fantasia was also included with the Sega pack, and a LaserActive branded 6-button Genesis controller. The TurboGrafx 16 and Genesis cartridge and CD games were region-locked based on which pack you owned, but LaserActive games themselves were region-free and usually bilingual. A brilliant move, really, considering the boutique nature of the system and the added cost of video or voice acting. It did lead to some pretty awkward moments, though, such as in Space Berserker, where the pilot is clearly speaking English while the lady back on the mothership has obviously been dubbed over.
Valkyria Training Squadron. Complete preparations for launch.
Valkyrie Sigma Squadron. Permissions for launch granted. Keep your heads up.
Play this in Japanese and you get the opposite problem.
Valkyrie Sigma Tai. 出撃を許可します。みんな、頑張って。
The 2 LaserActive games available for purchase at launch were both for the Sega hardware. The first is another edutainment title, as well as another title based on ancient Egypt, The Great Pyramid. This is really much more a series of linked videos interspersed with some lightly interactive menus and animations. I Will, The Story of London is a bizarre mystery game in the vein of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where players travel around London unlocking new clips that eventually unravel the mystery of who stole a secret formula.
Quickly, Catherine. The alpha ozone, it's gone.
Oh!
I've been working on it for 30 years. I finally succeeded, and now it's gone.
the B side of this disc is presented as a travel guide of London itself. Let's take a look at the LaserActive hardware. On the bottom left of the face, you have the control pack installation slot, which is just a big cavity in the unit that normally has a plastic cover, which I happen to be missing. The center button above here is the pack release button, which requires way more pressure than is comfortable to pop out, especially when you just spent over $1,000 on all this fragile new technology. If the system is on, the pack release button will not work. Likewise, if a disc is being played, the door to the cartridge slot is locked. Beneath the disc trays are the remote control sensor and reset button. This button is only used with the various control packs and doesn't function otherwise. Basically, this is like a home button on most modern electronics, returning you to the LaserActive start screen from gameplay. On the right is the digital memory button. CAV, or Constant Angular Velocity Laserdiscs, also known as Standard Play, allowed users to pause on single frames of a film, as well as play the video back at variable speeds. Constant Linear Velocity discs, also known as Extended Play, did not offer these features. Turning on the digital memory allows freeze frame and multi-speed playback on CLV discs, though the image quality is noticeably worse. Oddly enough, when a pack is inserted into the LaserActive, digital memory is automatically on. Without a pack inserted, it defaults to off. More on that in a bit. The headphone jack and volume dial obviously need no explanation. Above those are the CD and LD stop and open buttons. Tapping one of these opens and closes the corresponding tray and stops playback. There are only two ways to connect the LaserActive to your television: via composite cables, the little yellow, red, and white cables that we all remember, or through an RF modulator. The only other jacks on the back of the system are for an optical audio cable and control jacks, which allowed users to connect the system to compatible equipment like their television so that its remote could control the LaserActive.
At this point in the video, I was going to complain about the fact that there's no S-Video connector on the LaserActive, since it seems like a no-brainer for a high-end piece of electronics like this in the mid-90s. But honestly, it's not that big a deal. Laserdisc actually outputs a composite video signal. And while I won't attempt a deep technical explanation of why that probably renders the lack of S-Video on the LaserActive a moot point, basically a composite video signal is separated into its various elements by the television or projector before hitting the screen. On Laserdisc players with S-Video connectors, that same composite video signal is separated into chroma and luma signals via a comb filter before being sent to the display. From what I can tell from the online Laserdisc community, the general consensus is that S-Video almost never made a significant improvement to the original composite signal. And given that the LaserActive was definitely not the most high-end Laserdisc player on the market, it was very unlikely an S-Video option would have been worthwhile on the system.
It should be noted, though, that the system's composite output is quite good, especially when compared to the two game consoles it supports. Where you would normally see colors bleeding or shimmering on a standard Genesis or TurboGrafx, the LaserActive outputs a nice, clean signal that tends to mitigate a lot of those problems. This footage from the GameSack LaserActive episode is a great example of what I'm talking about. The basic LaserActive unit could safely be called a mid-level player by 1993 standards, perhaps even entry-level. While it features standard playback and a digital memory option to allow for still frames and semi-smooth fast-forward and rewind functions on CAV discs, other basically standard features are missing, or at least seem to be missing at first. The system is capable of still frame display, but only by pressing the play button on the front of the console itself. The remote control does not feature a button that can perform the task. Likewise, the basic LaserActive is capable of frame-by-frame playback as well as slow motion forward and reverse, but again, not using the standard remote. If you want those features, you have two options. Buy a compatible remote control that includes buttons for those functions, or buy and install either the Sega or NEC packs. The LaserActive also doesn't include a multi-speed jog dial, though I'm not sure that function doesn't exist. I just don't have a proper remote with which to test it. Another feature that was becoming the norm in the mid-90s was automatic disc flipping. See, Laserdiscs can only hold 30 to 60 minutes of video per side, depending on the type of disc you're playing. At that point, you have to get up and physically flip or change the disc to continue watching your movie. By 1993, high-end players were offering what was essentially double-sided playback, which flipped the disc for you, but not on the LaserActive. As I previously mentioned, adding an NEC or Sega pack to the LaserActive actually unlocks some features like variable speed playback and frame-by-frame advance via an on-screen menu that is not accessible on the vanilla system. And that comes with its own problems. First of all, bringing up any sort of menu or program information usually results in the screen flashing, which is just annoying. This was a known issue which Pioneer actually pointed out in the system's operating manual. More annoying is the fact that the on-screen menu takes up a lot of screen real estate, and the advanced on-screen menu even more. Strangely enough, Pioneer didn't see fit to map playback shortcuts onto the Genesis or Turbo controllers, so anytime you want to do any sort of basic command during playback, you have to bring up the menu, manipulate the controls, and turn off the menu again. The most egregious part, though, is the fact that bringing up any sort of menu or screen display while one of the game packs is installed in the system reduces the overall screen resolution noticeably. Look at these comparison shots. I assume this resolution matches more closely to what you'd find on a Genesis or TurboGrafx and is done in order to maintain compatibility with the hardware. But in the end, none of that really mattered because the LaserActive and its various accoutrements were priced completely out of the range of any target demographic. The games business largely treated the machine as an oddity, while AV enthusiasts were curious why they were paying so much for such low-end tech. In the December 1993 issue of Video Magazine, reviewer Stuart Wolpin praised the LaserActive's potential as an all-in-one player, but couldn't help but wonder why anyone would pay over $2,500 for the experience when buying a similar player, a Genesis, Sega CD, and Duo would offer the exact same functionality and still leave plenty of money left over for a quality video switcher that would duplicate the convenience provided by the LaserActive. Wolpin went on to point out that Laserdisc players are often connected to big screen televisions and that the 4 to 6 foot length of the included controller cords would mean players sit uncomfortably close to those big screens. Once you began to question the value prospect of the convenience offered by the LaserActive, which Pioneer kind of hinged the entire endeavor on, the only real reason to own one came down to the games. Wolpin described the launch software perfectly when he called them compelling only in their spectacular unspectacularness. The LaserActive seemed dead on arrival. Over the following 3 years, 27 more games trickled out across Japan and the US, but the quality stayed pretty low on average, with the odd standouts like Road Avenger, Blue Chicago Blues, and Ghost Rush buried beneath piles of stuff like I Will, edutainment, and softcore porn titles. It didn't help that the market was ultimately split between owners of the NEC pack and Sega pack. NEC pack owners only had access to 14 of the LaserActive games, while Sega owners can only play 24 of the games on their hardware. With the cost of entry being so high, this seems like a poor tactic to push more hardware. 1994 brought a bit more support for the LaserActive in the form of a computer interface pack that featured a serial port allowing a computer to control the system, as well as the LaserActive program editor. I honestly don't know exactly what this did, but it could apparently be used with a few anime discs like the Tenchi Muyo series. Also released in 1994 were the LaserActive 3D goggles and the accompanying adapter. These goggles used the same active shutter technology found in both the Famicom and Master System 3D glasses. In fact, the Master System glasses are apparently interchangeable with the LaserActive 3D goggles. Although Sega had previously supported hybrid Mega Drive systems released by third parties, releasing its own branded version of the original Wonder Mega from Victor, its support of the LaserActive was nearly non-existent. NEC, on the other hand, released its own clone of the LaserActive hardware, the PCE LD1, in 1994. This makes a bit of sense considering NEC, unlike Sega, was not strictly a video game system manufacturer. In the end, it didn't really move the needle. By late 1995, posters on Usenet groups were reporting retailers clearing out LaserActive bundles that included the Sega pack and some software for as little as $300. more than 80% off its original suggested retail price. These bundles were actually part of Pioneer's strategy to clear out remaining stock, announcing in December of 1995 the discontinuation of the LaserActive, just 2 years after launch. In spite of the Laserdisc market seeing an upturn at the end of 1993 and through 1994, the LaserActive didn't appear to be a factor. The warning signs were there in early 1994 when the planned European launch never happened.
Sometimes you get a win with a hit product and sometimes you don't. In the game industry, a lot of people make the money on the software, not the hardware. We were trying to make some profit on the hardware side as well as the software side, which is not how that industry is structured. David McCullough, AV Brand Manager, Pioneer.
McCullough cited a reluctance from software developers to support the system as a major contributing factor. Ironically, some retailers reported brisk sales of the LaserActive bundle at the $300 price point. By the mid-90s, multimedia gaming wasn't dead, but it was clear the Laserdisc format really didn't have a part to play. Both Sony and Sega were launching CD-based next-generation hardware, and it would only be 5 or 6 more years before DVD hit the mainstream and transformed both home video and game consoles. An unnamed market observer in the November 20th, 1993 issue of Billboard magazine predicted the fate of the LaserActive very early on, warning that Pioneer was spending too much time on Laserdisc research and development while advances in digital compression on 5-inch discs was moving forward by leaps and bounds. Author Tony Feldman echoed this sentiment while talking about Laserdiscs in his book in 1994 when he wrote, "While video discs undoubtedly have an important and continuing role in multimedia systems, the long-term future rests with the various evolving forms of CD media." To be fair to Pioneer, the LaserActive wasn't the only casualty of the multimedia gaming wars of the early 90s. The Amiga CD32 did not help Commodore avoid bankruptcy in 1994. Tandy had dropped the VIS in 94 as well, with Radio Shack employees widely joking that VIS stood for virtually impossible to sell. By 1996, Philips had basically abandoned the CDI, and 3DO moved out of the hardware space altogether to become a third-party developer. But this was an exciting time in the video games industry. These machines seemed to hold impossible promise and were exciting in spite of their gargantuan price tags. No one really knew where gaming would go next, and in hindsight it's plain to see that much of the vision driving these various consoles wasn't necessarily wrong, it was just too far ahead of its time to be viable. The rapidly evolving ability to compress more and more data on 5-inch optical discs wasn't about to leave just the Laserdisc behind, but the CD as well, with the relatively quick progression to DVD, as well as the development and proliferation of high-speed internet connectivity. Yes, the window of time where LaserActive could have succeeded was smaller than I think anyone actually realized, but it wasn't much bigger for the likes of Philips, 3DO, or Tandy. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at the LaserActive and its history. I have to extend an extra special thanks to Stephen Thomason for his incredible generosity in helping me access games and footage of this console. Huge thanks to Jim Kreutz for his photography skills, Mike White for his always top-notch research skills, and to Chantal Pard for sourcing seemingly impossible to find interviews and hardware reviews. Also to Kevin Bunch, Al Nilsson, Hi Conrad, and Joe Redifer for their help. And as always, thank you so much to my patrons for your wonderful support.